I'm delighted to have this opportunity to thank the people of Flanders, and especially Ypres and members of the Last Post Association, for continuing to honour the sacrifice of our fallen.
90 years old, newly widowed, visibly frail, standing at the most solemn public ceremony in the British royal calendar, and in full view of every senior royal in that space, he turned his back on the Queen of England. Not slowly, not with the uncertainty of an old man losing his bearings. He saw her. He registered exactly who she was, and he turned completely away, like she was nobody, like she was not the Queen of England standing 3 feet from him, like she was not even worth the effort of a nod. The silence that followed that moment was the loudest thing at the cenotaph on that cold November morning in 2025. And that was only the beginning of what the Duke of Kent did that day. Because after he turned away from Camilla, he moved toward Catherine. He took her hand. He held it longer than the moment called for. And then he leaned close to her ear and said something that only she could hear, something so direct, so deliberate, and so final that when Camilla found out what it was, she went straight to Charles and demanded he intervene. Charles heard her out, and then he told her no. This is the story of what the Duke of Kent did, why he did it, what it cost him to do it, and why the decision he made at that ceremony is about to reshape the jewelry inheritance of the British monarchy in a way that Camilla Parker Bowles cannot stop, cannot override, and cannot take back. To understand the full weight of what happened at that cenotaph, you need to understand who this man actually is. Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, has held his title for over 82 years. That makes him the longest-serving duke in British history. He and King Charles are the only 2 members of the British royal family who hold the rank of Field Marshal in the British Army. He has watched kings die and queens be crowned. He has watched this institution survive wars, betrayals, public humiliations, constitutional crises, and scandals that would have destroyed any ordinary family. He has sat in rooms where history was made and kept conversations in those rooms in total silence for decades, because men of his generation understood that silence was not weakness. Silence was discipline. For 9 decades the Duke of Kent kept his discipline absolutely. He served. He appeared. He said nothing that was not required of him. And then, on a cold November morning at the National Service of Remembrance, something shifted. He had stood at this ceremony many times before. He knew its weight. He knew its meaning. He knew every eye in that space and every camera on that plaza was pointed directly at the senior royals assembled to honor the fallen. He chose that moment not by accident, not by confusion, but with complete and deliberate intention. But to understand why he chose that moment for this verdict, you have to go back much further. Because the hatred, and there is no softer word for what the Duke of Kent had been carrying toward Camilla Parker Bowles, was not built overnight. It was constructed slowly in absolute silence across 3 decades of watching. The Duke of Kent's mother was Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. She carried royal blood that ran directly into the Romanov dynasty, the Russian imperial family that was marched into a basement in Ekaterinburg in 1918 and executed without trial. Every jewel Marina wore carried that history inside it. The Cambridge sapphire parure, the Kent pearl festoon tiara, the diamond girandole earrings, the pearl fringe tiara, the remodeled diamond bandeau that had once belonged to Queen Mary herself. These pieces did not simply survive fashions and seasons. They survived a massacre. They survived 2 world wars. They survived a financial crisis so devastating that the Duke and the Duchess were forced to sell the most precious pieces privately. The sapphire tiara was sold. The necklace was sold. The stomacher was sold. The buyer has never been fully confirmed publicly. And some of those pieces may have left Britain entirely and never returned. What remained was the broken remnant of what had once been one of the greatest private royal jewelry collections in Britain. And the 90-year-old man standing at the cenotaph with Sophie holding him upright was the last living person who remembered the hands that first wore them. He was the last custodian of a lineage that had survived things most people cannot imagine. And what he did with what remained was never going to be a casual decision. But the jewelry alone does not explain what happened at the cenotaph. There was something else the Duke was carrying into that morning. Something personal. Something that had been building in him since the 1980s and had never once been spoken out loud. He knew what was happening to Diana. He was a first cousin to the Queen. He was a senior working royal throughout the entire arc of Charles and Diana's marriage and its destruction. He sat in rooms where conversations happened that the public was never permitted to hear. He knew about the betrayal. He knew about the affair. And he knew about what it was doing to Diana from the inside. Diana was hurting herself. She would take something sharp and draw it across her skin and watch herself bleed, and she would not cry. She told people close to her that the pain she felt in her heart was so far beyond anything she could feel in her skin that the cutting almost felt like relief by comparison. She would lock herself down emotionally, struggle to understand whether she was trying to stop herself from breaking completely or whether she was punishing herself for not being enough for a man who had already chosen someone else. According to insiders, there were moments so dark that she stood in front of a mirror with scissors and cut her own hair, and then stared at what she had done and asked out loud whether Charles thought she was not beautiful enough. This was a woman being destroyed in real time inside a palace while the people around her collectively decided she was too difficult to protect. And the Duke of Kent knew all of it. He knew that Camilla Parker Bowles was at the center of Diana's pain. He watched a woman with royal blood, with sincerity, with a connection to the public that this family had never produced before and has not produced since, be ground down by an institution that was supposed to protect her. He said nothing, in the way that men of his generation handled unbearable things. He kept serving and he kept his silence. But he did not forget and he did not forgive. So when he eventually turned his back on Camilla at the cenotaph, he was not making a snap decision. He was delivering a verdict that had been waiting 30 years for the right moment. But there was a second layer to what was driving the Duke of Kent's contempt, and this one was even more personal. It had nothing to do with Diana. It had everything to do with his own wife. The Duchess of Kent, Catherine, was not like other royal women. She was not polished in the way the institution expected its women to be. She suffered in ways she could not always hide. In the 1970s, she was admitted to a psychiatric facility after suffering a complete mental breakdown that the palace quietly tried to keep out of public conversation. She battled severe depression for years. There were periods where she simply disappeared from public life with no explanation offered. She converted to Catholicism, a deeply personal and deeply controversial decision that placed her outside the Church of England and made her quietly controversial in certain palace circles. She was broken by this institution in ways that never fully healed. And to the people who genuinely loved her, she was one of the most sincere and most deeply damaged human beings who had ever carried a royal title. Inside Camilla's circle, Catherine was a joke. Former royal staff described gatherings where Camilla and those closest to her would raise the Duchess of Kent's struggles and tear into them with visible enjoyment. Camilla would throw her head back laughing. The words that kept coming up were unstable and weak. They called her an embarrassment to the title she carried. Catherine was never in those rooms to defend herself. She could not fight back. And that inaccessibility made the mockery easier. Her pain, genuine, documented, publicly known pain, was something they passed around like entertainment, laughed at openly, and discarded. And every single word of it got back to the Duke of Kent. Think about what that means. His wife, a woman who had given her entire adult life to duty and had been broken by it, being publicly mocked for the suffering this institution had caused her, by the woman who had constructed her entire position in life on top of another woman's destroyed marriage. The cold between the Duke of Kent and Camilla Parker Bowles became absolute from that point forward. It was not frostiness. It was not distance. It was a permanent closure, a door that shut completely and never opened again. And then came the jewelry, and Camilla went too far. After Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022, the inventory of the Queen's personal jewelry collection was reviewed and allocations were made to members of the royal family. Catherine had quietly expressed interest in a specific diamond brooch. It was a piece Diana had worn twice, a piece Catherine had been photographed admiring in old archival footage. That brooch carried a meaning to Catherine that went far beyond its setting and its stones. It connected her to Diana, and that connection was not performance. It was something she felt genuinely and showed consistently through every choice she made about what to wear and when to wear it. When the allocation was finalized, the brooch had been assigned to Camilla. Catherine was informed it was already taken. She said nothing publicly. She made no statement. She did not complain to anyone in front of cameras or leak her feelings to a sympathetic journalist. But in the days that followed, the people closest to her saw something impossible to miss. She was devastated. She moved through her engagements that week visibly hollowed out, quieter than anyone had seen her in years. Staff who saw her up close in that period reported that her eyes were red and swollen on more than one morning. She carried it the way she carries everything that costs her deeply, in complete silence. Then came the state banquet in 2023. Catherine's team submitted a formal request through the Lord Chamberlain's office for access to a Queen Mary tiara from the royal collection. The request was processed and came back denied. The piece had been assigned to Camilla for a separate engagement scheduled the same week. Sources close to both households were clear in saying that the timing of those two competing requests landing in the same window was not coincidental on Camilla's side. And then Camilla said something out loud that should never have left the room it was spoken in. At a semi-private dinner with people close to her, she said that Catherine's deliberate pattern of wearing Diana's jewelry was nothing but performance. She said it with contempt sitting open on her face. Catherine was not honoring Diana's memory, Camilla told everyone there. She was exploiting public grief to manufacture sympathy. And then came the sentence that sources say made several people in that room visibly uncomfortable. She said, "She is using a dead woman as a costume." She said that out loud to a room full of people. When those words found their way to William, what followed between the two households was described by multiple sources as one of the coldest confrontations in years. And every single word of it reached the Duke of Kent. He watched Camilla move through the allocation of the Queen's jewelry after her death like someone collecting what she believed she was owed. He watched Catherine absorb blow after blow without ever cracking publicly. He watched a pattern repeat itself that he had already watched once before in a different decade in a different woman's life. And he made his decision not at the cenotaph. The cenotaph was simply the moment he chose to make it visible. The decision had been made long before that cold November morning in 2025. November 2025. The National Service of Remembrance. One of the most solemn public occasions in the British royal calendar. The cameras were rolling. Every senior royal in the country was assembled. The Duke of Kent stood with Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, her arm under his to keep him steady. His body was failing. His health had been declining for months. This appearance may have been his last time ever standing at the ceremony, and every person there seemed to understand that without it needing to be said. When Camilla came within range, he turned his back on her, not slowly, not with confusion. He registered her presence and dismissed it entirely, like she was not the Queen of England, like she was not standing 3 feet from him, like she was not worth the acknowledgement of a nod. Then he moved toward Catherine. He took her hand and held it. He held it longer than the ceremony required. The people standing nearby could not look away. And then he leaned close to her ear and delivered the words that sources close to his household later reconstructed from multiple accounts. He told her the jewels were going where they belonged. He told her that his mother's legacy was not going to end up around the neck of someone with no right to wear it. He did not say Camilla's name. He did not need to. Everyone in that space already understood exactly who he meant. The atmosphere in that space shifted immediately. Something had been spoken out loud that had lived in silence for a very long time. Camilla knew within hours. Every detail of what had happened, what he had done, what he had said, who had been watching had reached her before the day was over. And she was not composed about it. The same evening, the cenotaph ceremony ended, and Camilla sat down with Charles. She did not come to him in tears. She came to him with a case carefully constructed and delivered with precision. She told him that the Duke's gesture was not a private matter between a grieving old man and a younger royal woman. She framed it as an institutional problem. A senior royal, the longest-serving Duke in British history, a Field Marshal of the British Army, had publicly endorsed Catherine's claim to private jewelry over the standing of the sitting Queen Consort. He had done it at the cenotaph, at one of the most photographed and most sacred ceremonies in the royal year. That, Camilla argued, directly undermined the hierarchy of the crown. Charles listened. He always listens to Camilla. She has shaped more decisions inside this monarchy than the public has ever been permitted to know. She has never lost an argument with Charles that she truly wanted to win. But this time, Charles did not move. He looked straight at Camilla and told her that the Duke was entitled to his own private decisions. He said it and then he was done. Camilla left the conversation without a single word. And the people who know her well understand that her silence after losing an argument is never acceptance. It is the beginning of something else entirely. But here is what Camilla had failed to account for when she built her case. The Duke of Kent's jewels were never hers to claim, not by any royal rule that exists anywhere. The pieces the Duke holds are private property. They are not the crown jewels, which belong to the monarchy and pass from sovereign to sovereign. They are not part of the royal collection, which belongs to the institution. They belong to the Duke personally, and he can gift them, sell them, or leave them in his will to whoever he decides, with zero obligation to anyone including the Queen of England. As for Camilla's own position, she had already been crowned in May 2023, wearing a remodeled crown containing Cullinan diamonds. In January 2025, that crown was officially renamed Queen Camilla's crown. Her place in the hierarchy was documented. Her jewelry for her reign was in place. Nobody was challenging any of that. But a title on paper and a crown with your name engraved on it mean nothing if the people who have spent their lives inside this institution look through you when they see you. And that is exactly what was eating Camilla alive. Charles's refusal to intervene on Camilla's behalf reveals something important about the power the Duke of Kent still holds over this king even now, even at 90 years old. The Duke of Kent is not someone Charles can silence with a phone call or redirect with a quiet private conversation. He belongs to a generation of Windsor that existed long before Charles created the messes that nearly destroyed this monarchy. Before the affair with Camilla, before the public humiliation of Diana, before the divorce that scandalized the entire country, the men of the Duke's generation held the line. They placed the crown above their own desires, above their own comfort, above every personal want. They did it completely and without complaint and without asking for recognition for doing it. Charles did not always do that. And the entire world watched what happened when he did not. The Duke of Kent watched it happen from inside the institution. And now every time Charles walks into a room where the Duke is standing, both men carry the full knowledge of what sits between them. Charles knows that the Duke remembers everything. He remembers the affair. He remembers Diana. He remembers the years when this family chose protecting itself over protecting the woman it had brought inside its walls. And that is a power no title and no royal command can ever take away from a man who holds it. But there was something underneath all of this that the public conversation had not fully confronted, something that made the Duke's decision not just meaningful on a personal level, but urgent in a way that had nothing to do with old grievances or private feelings. If Catherine did not receive these jewels, they would not go to the crown. They would not enter the royal collection. They would not appear at coronations or state banquets or Trooping the Colour or Wimbledon. They would pass to George, Earl of St. Andrews, the Duke's eldest son and heir to the dukedom. George married a Catholic, which removed him entirely from the line of succession. His wife holds no royal standing whatsoever. Lord Nicholas, the Duke's younger son, also converted to Catholicism and was similarly removed. Lady Helen Taylor lives entirely privately. None of the Duke's 3 children are working royals. None of them appear at the occasions where royal jewelry functions as living history rather than stored property. If the Cambridge sapphire fragments, the Kent pearl festoon tiara, the diamond girandole earrings, the pearl fringe tiara, and the remodeled diamond bandeau passed to the Duke's children and their families, they would go into a private home. They would sit in a box. They would be worn by no one connected to the monarchy. They would be seen by no one who could carry their meaning forward. And the last remaining physical link to Princess Marina, a woman who carried Romanov blood, who survived the collapse of empires, who wore those pieces through some of the darkest years of the 20th century, would vanish from the British crown entirely and permanently. The Duke had been sitting with this problem for years, and he had arrived at an answer that was not sentimental. It was practical, clear, and final. The Cambridge sapphires did not begin with Marina. They did not begin with Queen Mary. They began with Princess Augusta, Duchess of Cambridge, in the 19th century. They passed to Queen Mary after Augusta died in 1916. Queen Mary gave them to Marina as a wedding gift in 1934. That is more than 200 years of women carrying something precious forward and placing it deliberately into the next set of waiting hands before they were gone. Now consider this carefully. Cambridge was the first title that William and Catherine held together when they married in 2011. The Duke of Kent is 90 years old and his mind is completely sharp. He knows exactly what the Cambridge name inscribed in the history of those sapphires means if they go to Catherine. It is a direct and unbroken line running from Princess Augusta through Queen Mary through Princess Marina to the woman who will one day stand at Westminster Abbey and be crowned Queen of England. A line that has passed through more than 2 centuries of grief, survival, war, financial ruin, political collapse, and endurance. And the Duke of Kent is choosing to be the man who keeps it unbroken, who refuses to let it end in a private storage box in the English countryside where no one royal will ever see it again. There is a reason the Duke made this choice for Catherine specifically, and it goes beyond the Cambridge name and the dynastic logic. He watched her for years, and what he saw was something this family has not produced consistently in a very long time. Catherine has spent 14 years treating every piece of royal jewelry she wears as a living thing with a story that deserves to be continued rather than merely displayed. When she wore the Cambridge Lovers' Knot tiara at the state banquet for the U.S. President in September 2025, she was not simply wearing a tiara. She was wearing Diana. Every person in that room knew it. Every person watching on television felt it. When she wore Queen Elizabeth's Bahrain pearl earrings at Commonwealth Day in 2026, she was keeping the late Queen present in a room that had moved on without her. Catherine was not trying to look beautiful at those events. She was trying to make sure that no one forgot. And the public responded to it every single time, because they could see she meant it. You cannot manufacture that. There is no styling team on earth that can create the impression of genuine reverence when genuine reverence is absent. It either lives in the person wearing the piece or it does not. It does not live in Camilla. For all her years and all her titles and all the institutional weight behind her position, Camilla has never once produced what Catherine produces when she walks into a room wearing Diana's jewelry or Queen Mary's pearls or a piece with 150 years of royal history embedded in its setting. The public knows the difference. The cameras know the difference. And the Duke of Kent knew the difference long before either of those observations were made publicly. In 2024, the Duke watched one final thing that sealed his decision completely. Catherine's cancer diagnosis. The surgery. The months of silence while the world speculated and the palace offered almost nothing to the people who were frightened for her. The isolation of that period, the weight of carrying a life-threatening illness while simultaneously carrying the scrutiny that comes with being one of the most watched women on the planet. And then the return, slow, careful, entirely on her own terms. She stood on the steps of Windsor. She appeared at Trooping the Color. She returned to public life not as someone performing a recovery for the cameras, not as someone checking boxes to reassure the institution, but as someone who had genuinely passed through something devastating and come out the other side, changed in ways that were visible to anyone paying attention. The Duke of Kent had watched Diana bleed in private while the palace decided she was too difficult to protect. He had watched his own wife mocked and ridiculed by people who had never genuinely suffered a day in their privileged lives. He had watched Camilla collect jewelry allocations like entitlements after the Queen's death. He had watched Catherine absorb blow after blow without publicly breaking. And then he watched her face cancer and come back standing. He had seen enough. He had been silent for long enough. The Kent pearl festoon tiara has not appeared publicly in decades. The diamond girandole earrings from Marina's personal collection have not been worn at a major state occasion in years. The pearl fringe tiara, the remodeled diamond bandeau, all of them sitting somewhere quiet while the women who could carry their meaning forward are effectively shut out by private succession rules that were never designed with the monarchy's future in mind. Catherine would not let them sit. The first time Catherine walks into a state occasion wearing the Kent pearl festoon tiara, if that day comes, it will not simply be a beautiful woman in a beautiful piece of jewelry. It will be Marina's survival reaching into the present. It will be the Romanov history.